Hey there, I'm Dr. Jill Wener. I'm a physician, a meditation teacher, a tapping practitioner, an author, and I am an aspiring anti-racist, which requires continuous self-evaluation and reflection. And I am here with Faviana Campbell. So excited. She's one of my colleagues. She's a Vedic meditation teacher based in Brooklyn, and she's an eternal optimist. And Faviana, I'm just so thrilled to have you here to be interviewed. How are you? Thanks for joining me.
I'm great. I'm great. Thank you for having me. I just want to tell you, I really appreciate you having me on this platform, on this forum where we're going to talk about racism and anti-racism, because it's a very brave place to step into as a person who is white and a person who is living in the time that we're living in. And I also want to tell you, thank you to your listeners who are tuning in, because it just shows that they're willing to take that first step in dismantling these systems and these ideas that we have all been indoctrinated into.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I always feel a little bit like mixed when people tell me I'm brave for doing work that like all white people should be doing. And I should have been doing it the first 41 years of my life or 40 years of my life. But thank you for that. I do appreciate that. But we'll move forward. This is not about me, but thank you for that. So I'd love to know, we can just kind of jump right into it. I've been started this series exploring a lot about COVID and health disparities, racially based health disparities that have been an issue since well before COVID. And it's been really interesting to get more into my spiritual interests and talking with people who can help people listening understand spirituality through the lens of racism and anti-racism, because it's I think specifically for white people, it's not always easy to see how racism might have seeped in and taken over. So I'm going to ask you, our discussion today is going to be focused a lot on that. And so what I'd love to hear your take on is, what is spiritual bypassing and how does it play out in the wellness community, particularly with respect to racism?
So before I even answer that question, I want to go and answer another question that you brought up. It's like how white people see themselves, they don't think of themselves as racist. And it's because of how racism is defined, right? So white people tend to see racism as an individualized, conscious mistreatment and malintent across races. And so as an individual, I'm a good person. So thereby being a good person, I can't be racist. And what that does is that all it does is just beautifully protects the definition of racism. And I think that is part of the issue. And because, there's this new podcast that I'm like really into. It's called Nice White Parents. And it's really going and exploring that idea of like, but I'm a good white person. I'm not racist. And it's like, no, racism is this thing that we're all unconsciously breathing in, just like the air. Sometimes we're conscious of it, sometimes we're not conscious of it. And it's like seeping into all states of our consciousness. And we're inadvertently acting apart based on the systems and the structures that we've put into place. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. I think it's very disarming. Like it's like, oh, okay, I can take myself, not really taking yourself out of the equation, but understanding that my own complicity in it isn't because I'm evil, but it's because I exist. and I have been, raised in this system that has let it seep into me. I love that, how you said that. Then I don't have to, it doesn't have to be personal judgment against me. I can take my own ego out of it, and then I can just see what needs to be done. So thank you for clarifying that. That's great.
Yeah, and I think that it's a really important way to look at it, because it really does shape and change the way you think about racism and how it affects you. So spiritual bypassing, this is a really important topic, and we're seeing a lot of it happening, especially now as there's this awakening of the state of consciousness and people awakening to the fact that they need a spiritual practice, and that's a part of your whole care, like physical, mental, and spiritual. It's a part of your whole human care. But what spiritual bypassing is, it's rooted essentially in abandonment, repression, and escapism of the messiness of life. So you're using spirituality to escape from the messiness of life. And so people are like, well, good vibes only. I call those the vibrational tribes. Like they're all about the vibrations. Like they only want the good vibes only. And what they're saying to you is that they want to arrive, but they don't want to go through our process. Because like you said, you know, I said to you that you were brave and you're like, I think it's weird that people say that I'm brave, but it is brave. It is brave to look at yourself in the mirror, do a personal audit and deal with all the demons and the traumas in your closet. I once had a potential student, who's actually going to be a student soon. I said to her, like every year, I do this massive thing that I call a personal audit, like who I am now, who I intend to, what is my why for existing beyond, you know, what is my purpose that's not defined by my job, or who I show up into society as, and where I want to be, the things that I need to work on, because we're all like works in progress. And I said to her, I do this all the time, and I do it all the time, but every year I do a big one. It's my Maha audit. And she said to me,
explain what Maha is to the people.
Oh, Maha, M-A-H-A, is a Sanskrit word for like large and huge. It's this immense thing that's like encompassing all things. So I said to her, yeah, I do this audit every year, and I'm always looking to be a better version of myself, because there's no point in this existence if you're not doing that, at least to me. And the person responded to me, she said, you do that? That's the scariest thing that I can ever think about doing. And I was really taken aback by it, because this is something I've been doing since I was a child. I've always like trying to be a better version of a human being. And for someone to really shake my world and tell me that it was so scary for them to look in the mirror and deal with all their traumas, I was really taken aback by that, because I'm someone who's like, I will trade through hell to, you know, and deal with all my demons so that I can, you know, experience my own liberation. And it's very difficult for people to do that, because it really means that they have to face that. So what spiritual bypassing does is that it represses those feelings and avoids those feelings. And it uses spirituality as the salve and not the solve, which is it's a salve, it's not the solve, you know. And what happens with those people, and you know, you've experienced this in different spiritual communities, they have like these big outbursts of like anger or emotional responses that are just completely disconnected from the reality of what is happening. Like you're flipping out because you didn't get cream in your coffee. Like, I really don't think that's something you should be flipping out about. But because they're repressing so much, these feelings are just at the teether end. They're ready to come out, and they come out in these unexpected, uncontrollable ways. It's very dangerous, and it actually takes away from your spiritual practice in general. That's a long answer.
No, it's a great answer. That's a great answer. So how does that play out, would you say, with racism, particularly in the wellness community?
Yeah, it plays out in several ways, because people are spiritually bypassing, because, you know, we're all one and we're all big consciousness, and it's all about unity, you know. And you see it's in all communities, in religious communities, in spiritual, not religious communities, and it's everything. But this idea of idolizing unity over justice results in silence, right? And so silence in the face of injustice is, you know, siding with the oppressor. And you see this played all the time. Like, for example, the incumbent that we have in the White House right now, he was voted in by a lot of Christian evangelicals, and they're not the only ones. There are a lot of other religious people and spiritual people who voted for him. And these same churches and these same institutions, you'll see them, you know, send their missionaries or their people to Latin America and Africa, and they have these Instagram worthy things of all the good that they're doing in the world. But they're at the same time, they're simultaneously completely silent in the kind of brutality that's against Black bodies and Black bodies lining the streets, or the massive rates of incarceration that we have in Black and brown bodies. And they're silent in all of that, in all in the guise of unity. This is very dangerous. And so that's how spiritual bypassing plays a role, because they're favoring unity over justice, and that equals to silence, which is equals to oppression. One of the ways. Oh, go ahead.
So beautiful. No, I'm like writing down your quotes. Like I have like so many already that I'm like, you're saying it in such a wonderful, like because I've been really like diving into spiritual bypassing a lot, but the way you're describing it is really like hitting home with me.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Um,
I think then the other thing is that people don't realize that with, anti-racism work, anti-human work is spiritual work. I said to you, and we spoke about this a few weeks ago, when I said to you, people are talking about good vibes only, they're part of the vibration movement, only good vibes here. I only want the good things. And that's great that you only want the good things, but the life is also flipped with the shadow and all the other stuff that comes with it. But they don't realize that anti-racism work is spiritual work. They go hand in hand. And I said to you when we were having our conversation, I said, the fight that Black people are fighting for in this world is not a good vibes fight. It's not about vibrational ascension. It's an existential fight. It's a fight to be seen as whole and fully complex human beings. Mm-hmm. And so when you start thinking about your anti-racism work as a spiritual work, it starts helping you to question, what is humanity? What does it mean to be human? How do I show up in the world? How do I perceive others that show up in the world? Like this is really, it's all intertwined, because if you're working on your spiritual work to be a better version of yourself and a better human being, there's no way you can continue in that way and not have empathy and compassion for people and for people who are suffering from levels, huge, massive things of disenfranchisement and the injustice that you see in the world. If anything, you will be refused to stay silent. You're going to want to act.
Yeah.
And so, but you have to go in first for that to come out. It's not enough to say, like, we're in this period of these very short term, declarations of anti-racism and all of that, but that's not enough to change the systems and the systemic racism that we are dealing with in our society and the systems of inequalities. And you see it play out in everything, right? So, first it was the Black people, like consistently disenfranchised. And I always tell people, like, when my oppressor is done with me, they're going to move on to you, because that's how oppression works. Yeah. Right? And so you're seeing that in the United States, where we have a plutocracy and we don't have a democracy, really. And so people are struggling, especially during the pandemic. They're like, their financial needs are not met, their health needs are not met, their educational needs are not met. And they're realizing for the first time in a long time how unequal this system is, but they're willing to go along with it for a long time, because it wasn't happening to them. It was only happening to Black people.
Yeah, there's so much right now that, like people losing their health insurance because they got laid off because of COVID. And now actually seeing that's such a good point. Like you're right. It's like, it's going to come for you. And it's easy to pretend it's always easy to other and to point your fingers elsewhere, to make excuses, but we're all, how do you, like, because you and I are Vedic meditation teachers, we're from the same tradition.
Yeah.
I still do believe that we are all one thing. Like, we are made of the same energy particles, and we are all, that's not the lived reality. So how do you reconcile it? We can point our fingers, but we really are all in this together, except we're not. But like the lived reality versus the like spiritual tenet of that.
Well, I do think that the spiritual tenet is a lot of the lived reality. We're in the shades of ignorance, So the way in which that we're going about living our lives with this spiritual bypassing is de-evolutionary. It doesn't help us to evolve into this remembering of we're all one thing. Mm. What it does is that it actually separates us from the reality that we are all one thing. Yeah. And so it's actually de-evolving. And so, like I said, you find that these people are spiritual bypassing, they're not being present. Because, I find that with the thing about spiritual bypassing is that it ignores the human body and the human condition, because what you're looking for is outside of you. But you and I both know that the body is a temple of the divine. And so you have to be present and be embodied. And so by spiritual bypassing, it's really de-evolutionary, because you're not allowing for true creation to happen. What you're doing is that you're staying in a place of like maintenance. And when maintenance happens, destruction is going to happen, because you're just trying to maintain this perception that everything is okay and everything is all right and everything happens for a reason. That's my favorite one. And so what happens is that it's not allowing you to have the flexibility to adapt to the changing environment and change the systems that you need to change, so for us to all remember that we're all one thing. And I don't think everyone is going to become a meditator, let's just be real about that. But the ones who are, and the ones who are doing this spiritual work, are real agents of change to change a system, so that everyone else can open up and realize that they are also one thing, even if they don't have this practice.
Yeah. But I also think it's important that like doing the work doesn't just mean sitting for 20 minutes twice a day and meditating, but it actually means like using that, because that's a lot of the problem with spiritual bypassing. You and I have talked about, like, just by becoming a meditator, it's inherently taught in our tradition that that's enough.
Yeah, and I think that's a flawed idea, because at the part of, I always go back to Yugasta Kuru Karmani, and that's Sanskrit for establish in being, perform action, So it's good that you're sitting down for 20 minutes twice a day to meditate, because we're meditating to get better at life, not to get better at meditation. So as you're getting better at life, it means that once you open up your eyes into your waking state, you're going to realize, like, this is such a disconnect with the reality of what the experience is which is we are, individual vehicles of, individualized expressions of divine consciousness. And you open up your eyes and you're like, wait, this is the opposite of that. And why is that so? What can I do within my society or within my milieu to make a change so that more people can have the access and the agency to access these tools? Because the thing about it is that, the reality is that people will say that, yeah, but you don't have to be wealthy to afford meditation and do all that stuff. But there is a cost to doing all of this, whether it is a time cost where you go to an ashram and you put your time in, or you pay some money for it. And the reality is that the way that we've structured our society is that time is of a limited resource for most people and most working class poor people. And so is money, right? So it's like, you have to kind of like balance these two things and offer a way for people to access it. So if you can't afford it right now, what am I doing to dismantle a system that you can have access to the basic things that you need, so your life can be more enriched, for you to start thinking not just about your core basic needs from your Maslow hierarchy of needs, but the things that are going to actually give you liberation. Because many of us are free, but we're not liberated. Those are very different things.
Tell me more.
Because, there's a lot of social conditioning and social trapping. So I would argue that, Black people, we don't have chains on our hands and feet anymore. And white people are not changed and haven't been chained in this country for the most part. But most people are mentally enslaved, and they're mentally entrapped by the social conditionings around us. There's a lot of social conditioning and a lot of social hypnosis, and they are rendered in that way to remove choice. Social conditioning and social hypnosis removes choice. It makes us choiceless. And there are times when it makes sense, and for the most part, it doesn't. So I'll give you a time when it makes sense. It is the right thing to do and polite that when you wake up in the morning and you go outside, you say hello to your neighbor. That's a part of our social conditioning, right? It's a part of the morals and the expectations of our society to do that. And that makes sense because you don't think about it. You see your neighbor, you're like, hey Jill, how are you doing? That's great, bye, and you move on. But then there's ways in which it's very, very sinister, and it shows up in our lives all the time. Well, you're a Black girl, so you are not supposed to be as outspoken as you are in your meetings. Or you're not going to make any money being an artist. Why don't you go to med school? Those kinds of things. And then you start to believe that. And so what happens that you ignore your own intuition, you ignore the things that, your own truth is telling you, you bypass that to apply some conditions or some ideas that the world has told you to believe. And I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who's a filmmaker. She's one of my favorite creatives. And she was talking about Orange is the New Black and why she stopped watching it. And she was saying that in all the scenes with white women, and they were having intercourse or having an intimate moment, they would be on a bed, or they would be like some kind of dream thing where they were like feathers were coming down, etc. But anything with the woman of color, it would be like they were in the back of a closet. It was always rough and it was always aggressive. And so that was playing a role. It was subtle, and it was playing a role in the film. And then you see how the social conditioning comes into play, because white women are seen as the emblem of femininity and fragility, and all other women are not that. And so they are playing these roles, even in an intimate setting, that tells you that they're not that. And that's a social conditioning coming in again. It's leaving us without choice, and we don't think about it because we're like, oh, they're talking about women who are incarcerated. At least they're giving voices to these women, but you're not looking at the nuances that are happening when it comes down to race when you're talking about voices.
Yeah, and it's so deep. I mean, there's so many layers of it. I've watched that show and never noticed that, of course. So it'll be interesting if I ever do watch it again to pay attention. But pictures in the media, they're like Black athletes, or like, I've talked about this before on this show, like the pictures that you see in media, the way that Black people are represented are not like, and then compared to the way the white people are represented in the same context, are totally different. And it's not even something that white people notice. It's just like, that's what you see, and that you don't even realize that it's like making a mark inside your brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a lot of conditioning.
Yeah. And like and it's actually funny because like the pictures that I take screenshots for this, but for my YouTube covers, mm-hmm. and I always make sure to get like a screenshot of like the person I'm interviewing looking like lovely and smiling, and me being like, because like, I just think it's like me, and I cover my face up with words and stuff like that. It's intentional, right? Because I feel like we need to take steps to like reverse the way that people are portrayed in media. So why is it problematic for white people to tell anyone or people of color to lead with love? And we've sort of gotten at this, but that's a particularly annoying thing that people say and can be harmful.
Lead with love, everything happens for a reason. It's actually quite offensive to people who are dealing with oppression. Because as you're saying that, again, I always go back to inquiry. Are you leading with love? Mm-hmm. Is everything happening in your life for a reason? Because I can tell you, everything is happening for a reason. You're not wrong about that. And it's happened for the reason because we have developed and engineered systems of inequities and oppression. That's why it's happening. Lead with love. You're right. We should have more love and light in the world. And I'm all here for that. But again, making a declaration about that without actually understanding what is happening in the system, it's a form of spiritual bypassing. You're like, you know what? That's just too much for me. I can't listen to the news. I can't do any of that. All I can offer is that I'm just going to lead with love and light in the world, and just try to to do that as much as possible. It is spiritual bypass, and it is avoidance. It's avoidance of the realities of what's happening in your society. And after a while, those systems will come to your doorstep. I think about it this way. It's like America is a house, or like the world's a house, right? Let's say America is a house, and Black people on the ground, and that's burning down, and Black people on the ground floor. And once that burns down, the rest of the house is going to come down too. And so at some point, all of this is going to come to you, but leading with love, when you're not actually demonstrating that in your lived experience and not really doing the inquiry to what's happening, it's quite offensive.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a, like, it's so pervasive in the Western spiritual wellness community. How does meditation help us confront racism and other bias?
So I think that, again, spiritual work is anti-racism work, anti-human work, because racism is just anti-human. That's just what it is. What spirituality does and what meditation does is that, when we're sitting down, we're like all a ball of stress and traumas. That's just a lot of us have a lot of those. Whether you agree with that statement or not, there's something that has happened into your life that has left some kind of so what in Sanskrit they call it samskara, a scar or an impression in your life, right? Negative or positive. And we all have that in our life. What meditation does, at least what we do, and I think most meditation practices do that, is that it helps you to de-excite the nervous system, and it allows you to rest deeply and release massive amounts of stress. Now, that's a very interesting little mechanism, because when we say stress, we're using this as a very broad term to describe a whole bunch of crap. Like, it could be like repressed emotions, depression, your anxiety, and you're releasing all of that. And as you release all of that, it allows you to be more present and more sustainable in life and more adaptable. Because if you're not bogged down with all of your stresses, you're more able to adapt to the massive changes and the constant pressures that are life. I mean, I've sat down, you know this, Jill, you've probably had these. You sit down in a meditation, you're like, ah! You cry the whole time because you're just like releasing this massive amount of stress that you've built up. And I think meditation is a very gentle way of dealing with these stresses. And it also, more importantly, it also helps break the social conditioning. Because as you get to sit down, and the body's a temple of the divine, and I truly believe that, and you have these experiences where you're sitting in the palm of the greatest architect that is, and you realize, wait, we're all one thing. And you start breaking through ideas and concepts that you have, like, what is it to be a woman? Like, what does femininity look like? Sometimes these things come up in your meditation, and you're just like, well, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way. Or you wake up in your waking state and you're like, well, that doesn't seem right to me. Let me challenge that condition. Like, I had a student the other day who they do windows and tints, and they walked past the school every single day. It had a broken window. Never thought about it. Never thought twice about it. Didn't really matter. Some of the windows needed repairing. And one day they've been meditating for a little bit at this point. They walk past the window. They're like, those windows are broken. I wonder why they're broken for that school. And so they go in now, and they went to the school to figure out how they can help to fix the windows and repair the windows, because winter was coming. And that matters, because, like, again, all the stresses that person was running around with, it didn't allow them to open up their awareness to the realities of the space that they were living in and their lived experience. Yeah. Then the stresses start falling away. You start de-exciting the nervous system and resting very deeply, getting rid of the stress, and you're able to be more present and be in your human body. Like, it's very important for us to not feel disembodied from the body that we're in. We've chosen these bodies and come to these bodies for a reason. And so when you think about spirituality, it's not about, transcending the body and the human experience. You've chosen a human experience because it's probably one of the best tools for liberation, whether people believe that or not.
Right. So we didn't talk about this beforehand, but the concept of reincarnation is something that I was never raised to believe, but going through the learning Vedic meditation and learning more about Vedic philosophy and culture, it made sense to me. It was sort of like, yeah, you chose this life for a reason. You had a specific lesson to learn. Your soul chose it, even if it's ugly. Not your soul, but the life. Even if there's pain, you're learning a specific lesson, and then you're evolving, and you go to the next and next lifetime until you're liberated. Now, I have heard that used as a way to explain like some of the horrible things I saw in the healthcare system for the 19-year-old of my patient of mine who died of leukemia and all these things. It's like, no, she chose that body for a reason. I feel like it's a very privileged way to see the world, even though this tradition comes from India, and there's people of profound poverty there who believe it, and it's part of their culture. But like, how do you talk about that in terms of anti-racism and racism? Because there's this assumption that somehow finding the spiritual path, you are therefore more evolved. And B, there's this assumption of like, oh, well, you chose this body, therefore it's not, you can like step away from it a little bit. It's just, oh, that's just the life that you chose. Like I had a student who was a tapping client who was molested, and she was like, I don't believe that. I did not choose this lifetime to be molested. Like that's not, and so how do you reconcile that with the lived realities of people?
Again, spiritual bypassing which is the topic that we're discussing, right? So yes, if you chose to believe in reincarnation, that's fine. If you choose not to believe it, that's fine. Whether you believe it or not is not any of my concern. But the idea that someone chose to be Black, or chose to be molested, or chose to have an experience or chose to be poor, that's not real. Like, we have engineered systems that have created massive amounts of poverty. During the pandemic, the heights of the pandemic, I mean, we're still in it because, coronavirus is an American virus because we have more people who died from coronavirus than anywhere else in the world at this point. So, hey, during the pandemic, like in March, the 300 people made $360 million in less than 3 months. That's concerning. Mm-hmm. So are you telling me that I chose to be born into poverty? No, I chose to be born into this life and this human experience. It so happened that we have a very sick society that engineers these levels of poverty. And the idea with this reincarnation thing, which is a very misunderstood, is that you're not trying to like learn this lesson so you can move on to the next life to learn the next lesson. The goal is to get liberated in every lifetime, so you don't have to do all of that, because that's just a lot of pain and suffering. But I don't believe that people choose their traumas and stuff. I believe that the trauma that happens to you is not your fault, but I think it's your responsibility to heal from them. And I don't think those two things have anything to do with reincarnation and spirituality and everything else. I think, again, when you have and we've heard this a lot of times in our community, when you have an experience that's negative or, embodies the messiness of human lives, and someone tells you, well, you chose that life. Yes, I did choose this life, but I did not choose this traumatic experience. Mm. And for you to tell a young child or anyone who's been assaulted that they chose that experience it's very troubling to me. And it lacks empathy, it lacks compassion, and it's again too evolved with the spiritual realm and not the actual activities that are actually happening in the human body, and in our manifested life. It's very disturbing, actually. Very disturbed by it.
Yeah. So, and I think there's also this notion that privileged people are better, and one thing that's been hugely important for me to realize and understand is just because I have privilege in this life doesn't mean that I am better. And in fact, I think it's a, as we've talked about, it's a handicap. It's a weakness. It's like, it keeps me from seeing the reality of life. It keeps me from seeing the real unity between people, is that privilege and all that's like caked onto it, going through life in that way. So I think there's also this like myth in the spiritual community of like, I chose this life because I was rewarded, and now I'm a meditator and I'm, like privileged and I don't have to deal with the oppression. But I think that's so wrong. There's lessons to learn that have allowed me to start to recognize my privilege and start to try to dismantle it. But people see privilege. It's not a good thing. It's like recognizing it is one step, but also understanding that it keeps us down rather than it being something to aspire to, having a life of privilege. Does that make sense?
I see what you're saying, because what if I understand what you're saying that privilege is bad, and it makes people think that they're better because they have privilege. But what they don't understand is that privilege, in a sense, it makes you better from a material standpoint, because it gives you access to certain things. So it's not that you've made good choices, it's that you had good choices. You see what I'm saying? Versus like someone who is low income, didn't have a proper school system, lives in a food desert, didn't have access to proper healthcare, and they're like, well, and they ended up, not having the material gains or the access, or not emancipating from that level of poverty and going to another socioeconomic level. And you're like, well, they just made bad choices. They didn't make bad choices. They just didn't have them. So it's like, privilege allows you the ability to access different things and access different opportunities.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make you better. It just gives you a different level of access. And I think we need to understand it that way, is that what it allows you to access. You deciding now to become a Christian, a Buddhist, a Vedic meditator, a Hindu, whatever your spiritual modality is in whatever lifetime that you live, does not make you better than someone who is not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, one could argue the reason why you're able to do this is because you have a certain, a certain economic, so you're in a certain socioeconomic level, and you have some kind of financial stability where you can go and leave the United States or leave your country and buy a plane ticket and go to India to 4 to 6 months to a year,
Mm-hmm.
and or pay the monetary requirement that it is to learn to meditate. So your privilege gives you the access to all these things. And that's an important thing to understand, because here we're talking about Black people, but Black people, that's not a monolith. There's no Black community. There's Black communities that have the homogeneous experience of racism. That's all it is. That's only, besides the color of our skin and racism, that's the thing that is the most, common across the Black community. But it's not a monolith. There's a lot of nuances within it: ethnicities, class, gender, all this other stuff. But privilege does not make you better. What it does, it allows you to get access to different things. And this is why when you go to countries that were formerly enslaved and or colonized, there's a lot of colorism there, where people are looking like, I'm light skinned and my family is like Danish or European descent or something of the sort, because by jockeying for that proximity to whiteness, it allows them access to certain things and certain opportunities.
Yeah. I like that. It's not a decision, a choice you made. It's a choice you had.
Yeah, you had different choices.
And I think that it's not like I did something right that led me, in a past life that led me to this life where I'm white and I don't have to fear for my life. But so that's nice, but that doesn't, other than that, like that's what privilege gets you, is like not having to be oppressed by that system, but it doesn't give you any sort of like moral or
it doesn't give you a moral high ground.
And I actually think it sets you back, because you aren't able to see it's even harder to see the reality of lived experience in this world. So thank you for explaining that, because that's something I've been working my way through and trying to reconcile. And it's lovely to hear your thoughts about that. Can you talk about the importance of having a safe space and wellness for BIPOC, for Black and Indigenous people of color to heal? And what do white wellness leaders need to know about the spaces they provide, and why BIPOC might not feel safe there?
Yeah, this is a toughie. Because I have a lot of friends who've gone to therapists, or they've been into spiritual communities. I've been in spiritual communities myself and been like, this is definitely not the space for me, because of all the spiritual bypassing and the downplaying and the avoidance of the realities that are, and that we're living through. And it's really important to have a safe space, quote unquote, because in a spiritual environment, what we're talking about is we're talking about true vulnerability. What we were talking about before with that personal audit, we're talking about me looking and dealing with all my traumas and the things that have happened to me. Mm-hmm. And you need a space in which you can fully explore all of that and all the messiness of humanity. So when you explain to someone, I've experienced this moment and it was indeed racist, and they're like, well, don't worry about it. You chose this life for a reason, or just don't mind them. Just lead with love, or one of those other, seemingly innocuous statements. It's quite harmful and it's quite triggering. Or I've had situations where I'm like, this is the thing that happened, and it's been turned against me to be like, I am the problem and not the person that's the problem. There's no looking within. So it's really important that when people are being vulnerable and they're navigating all the traumas of their lives, that they have a space that they feel comfortable doing that. Unfortunately, most BIPOC people, Black people, Indigenous people of color, do not feel that way when they go into these white spiritual spaces, which are mostly white, unfortunately. And that really becomes down to access to resources. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, wellness and the wellness industry has become quite white. It's a lady with long blonde hair, or a brunette with long hair. She's really thin. She's wearing Lululemon or some other kind of brand, and she can do these amazing flexible poses with her body. And that's what wellness looks like. It does not look Black. It does not necessarily look Indian either. It only looks Indian from the standpoint of you have a guru who is teaching you, but not real activism or real teachers in the space. And which is fascinating to me, given that this whole meditation thing, the Vedas, Buddhism, it comes from India, and Buddhism does come from India, not what we consider modern in India, but where what the actual ancient India was. And then the entire wellness space is devoid of these people. So it's very troubling. The only way you get that kind of, you stop that hemorrhaging is if people do the work, and if these wellness teachers do the work. Again, what does it mean to be white? How has being white shaped your life? Mm-hmm. And, by doing that, you're going to allow some kind of empathy to come in. But what happens in these spaces is that there's a lack of empathy for someone else's experiences that doesn't look like yours. And I mean, at the same time, I'm just like, why would they have empathy? Their whole world is white. They've already stepped into a place that's also white, where everyone is just like, peace, love, blessings, and namaste. So I'm asking them to take a huge leap when they have demonstratively shown that they're not capable of doing that because they're not actively doing that.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
It did. Because I feel like there's a lot of more I want to attract more students of color, but you've got to, if you're talking about vibrations, you've got to you've got to create within yourself and what you're creating as your community, a place that feels safe, but without being I need you to come to my studio so I can feel better about myself for being like diverse and inclusive. It needs to be authentic. It needs to come from a place of true introspection and empathy, like you're saying. So I think
Yes,
that's what,
justice over unity. And again, these spiritual communities, they're all like, but we're all one. We're just one. You don't have to worry about it. Like everyone's Black, you know, everyone migrated from Africa. Yes, that is very true. However, our lived experiences are very different.
yeah, absolutely.
Like we're all African. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. That's not how that works. And again, that whole we're all African is no different from all lives matter.
Mm.
Because what you're doing is that you're saying to me, your experience doesn't matter because we're all one and I see us as one, except I don't treat you as such. And we are living in systems that treat you differently from how they treat me.
And I'm benefiting. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm benefiting on it, which is basically what someone said to me, it's assimilation. And if you're trying to assimilate into the larger group without recognizing human differences and celebrating those differences and, you know, appreciating those differences, you're also an oppressor.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're almost out of time. I do want to ask you one last question. What 3 things do you wish all white people did or knew in terms of anti-racism?
I actually wrote it down. So what I always go back to, Jill, and you know I say this all the time, inquiry, inquiry, inquiry. Inquire, what does it mean to be white? And how does whiteness shape your life? I also encourage them to read The Birth of the Nation, not the glorified versions of it, but really about how this country was formed. A good way to start is by starting with the 1619 project that was led by Nicole Hannah-Jones, a great introduction. And from there, you will have much more reading material after. And then realize that Blackness is not a monolith. There's no Black community. There are Black communities that are all having this homogeneous experience of systemic racism. And, you know, I think that would allow people to realize that, you know, because I tend to think that white people live outside of race. Everybody else is a race and they're just people.
Right.
That will help you to kind of challenge that assumption about what that is. So, yeah, those are my 3 things.
Those are great. Those are great. And the 1619 project is incredible. I haven't seen a new episode come out in a while, but they were like, and maybe I haven't checked in a while, but they're just in this like subtle like way, totally like every episode just like shifting everything of how I see the world.
And you can read the articles too. The articles are actually quite good as well, because I think that there's excerpts from the articles and the interview and all of that. And then, you know, anti-racism work always helps. You know, Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. I'm actually reading Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, as well. But I like Layla Saad's book a lot because it's a book that you do not just read. Yeah. Kendi also has, I think he also has a 21-day guide, which is like a book that you also do not read. And then
I think that one might, there might be an actual like imposter, like he might actually have one, but I think there might also be one that's out there that's like saying it's a compendium or a guide to his, but that he didn't write. So for anyone listening,
oh, good to know.
I saw him post about that. So just make sure that you're getting one that he actually wrote and authorized.
Right. I like Layla Saad's Me and White Supremacy a lot, because that's a book that you actually do. Then there's Dr. Eddie Moore's 21-day racial equity building challenge that I also like as well. But, you know, it's good that we all refresh and re-educate ourselves about how this country was formed, how the West was formed, building of the West by Black bodies. And it's very good that we understand that and the true nature of it. And it will help us all confront the realities of our society, because we're all poorly educated, all of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those resources. How can people find you and work with you? I know you're in Brooklyn. You teach meditation. How can people, if they want to learn from you or see what you have to say in the world, how can they find you?
Yes, you can find me at info@pureritam, PURERITAM.com. Ritam is a Sanskrit word. It's the truth underlining the entire universe. I'm always based in truth. It's all about truth for me. So you can find me there, info@pureritam.com. I am doing also weekly group meditation sessions. So you're welcome to join those as well. And yeah.
Great. And are those virtual?
Those are virtual, yes. They're happening on Zoom.
So people can just email you if they want to.
Yes, please email me if you want to join. Email me if you want to learn, or if you have a friend in Brooklyn who wants to learn. I'm open. I'm ready and willing to teach.
Awesome.
Always.
And are these group meditations for people in the Vedic meditation tradition only, or are they for all comers?
You know, what I've been doing, they've been mostly for Vedic meditators, but I open up my meditation to anyone who has some kind of meditation practice, who wants to learn to meditate, who wants to meditate for 20 minutes, because after that, there's usually a discussion about a different topic or something, or people ask questions. There's a lot of richness that can be had and a lot of things that you can learn that way.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Faviana, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jill. This was wonderful.
We got into it today. I love it. Getting really, answering some tough questions about spirituality and some of these myths and platitudes that are out there, and just really dismantling those, I think, is so important, because spirituality can be used as a weapon, and it can also be used as a tool to heal and to actually make the progress that we need. But it has to be done in the right way, and we're so lucky to have people like you in this world who are leaders in that way. So thank you for joining.
Thank you. Spirituality, the solve, not the salve.
I love it. I love it. All right. Thanks, Faviana.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. Have a wonderful rest of the day.